Welcome to Chapter 10. It's the first video of this module, and while we are going to jump into technically two slides here in Chapter 10, it's only actually to get me to a segue to talk about uh, headers and do a recap of some headers and why we would want to see those headers, as well as do a recap of how we can have our own classes and our own header file. So we're going to do that, and like I said, we're only doing enough of Chapter 10 to give us that segue and that context, but this is definitely much more of a review video regarding headers and our own classes with headers. So without further ado, let's talk about Chapter 10. I don't want to get too much into detail other than Chapter 10 is going to be, for the most part, about strings. So what does that mean? Well, again, to have strings, we have to have characters. And right away, we know what characters are. We've been using characters all along. However, in this slide, we're talking about how we can run functions against characters. And we're going to do these functions to see if the character matches a certain pattern. To do this, we need the CC type header file. And this is that segue that I was talking about. And this is how we're going to jump over and talk and do a real quick recap, or at least as quick of a recap as I am able to do typically, which is not usually all that fast, unfortunately. And we will call it a day after, or call a video after this. We're done with this little bit of a demonstration, so that way you can rewatch this video as much as you need to recap on the header files. So in chapter 10, right away we're talking about this CC type. To use these functions, we need this CC type. What does that mean? It's rather simple. In fact, oftentimes we already make use of a common header file called IOStream, and IOStream gives us our cout. It also gives us our cin, but we need to include a particular header file. So we're going to include, it's that CC type. As you can see, we're using these brackets. These brackets tell the compiler that this header file that we're looking for is part of its system header files. So this CC type we know is a system header, and that's why we put it in brackets, the angle brackets. And we do not have to put the .h, so we just put the CC type, just like that. And now with that, we can utilize any function that's in that header. For those that haven't taken my C++ course, the first one, what I'm using is known as an online C++ compiler. It's onlinegbd.com, and I'll probably post the video that I have in my first C++ course that talks briefly about this product. It's just a great quick, it allows me to do demos really quick. It allows me to do tests. Oftentimes if something is going awry with someone's code that they send it to me, I will throw it in here rather than Visual Studio. It's just a quick mechanism to test files. It's not very robust, not like Visual Studio, where you get a lot of IntelliSense and things like that. You don't get a lot of that here, but it is great for quick, down and dirty. I want to test something, or in this case, I want to demo something real quick. So here we're going to go ahead and just get rid of that hello world, and we're going to set up a char. We're all familiar with chars. And because we included the CC type, I can now make use of those library functions. Is alpha test. And again, you'll see that there's not much IntelliSense going on here. We're going to add another one just to make sure we are getting a good valid test. If we were all in a classroom together, you would have been able to say, Professor Waits, you said count instead of cout. Listed it again. There we go. Simple, easy little program here. We added that CC type as a header. So let's go ahead and run it. And as you can see, we get the yes, it is alpha, but we did not get this as a lowercase char. If we change this to a lowercase a and then rerun this, we should get both statements now because it is an alpha and it is lowercase. We change it to a 1. We don't get anything. Makes sense. All right, so this is really easy and we understand what's going on here. Now, with that being said, let's talk about having our own classes with our own header file. Because this is definitely something here in the advanced C++, you've got to make sure you're able to do and understand. So with this online compiler, it's pretty simple to do. It's somewhat similar in Visual Studio. You're going to create some new files. In Visual Studio, you have the ability to kind of tell it what files you want to create, and it does it for you. But here, we're just going to say new file. And we're going to call this myClass.h because we want to make a header file. You have to forgive me. I keep behind the scenes pausing the video because I have a little bit of a cough. Nothing too serious. It was a cold that I had and came and went very quickly, and did go and get the COVID test just to make sure, and I am negative, so we're good on that. But that is why I pause it so you don't have to hear my cough. Continuing on, so now I have my class H file. Now, because of who I am and my type of coding style, I know I'm going to be creating a class, so I just go ahead and get it out of the way and create the my class CPP, which is the C++ program, or C++. There we go. Now we got these 3 files. We've got our main CPP, our my class header file, and my class code file. Now, because I have some notes, I'm kind of not winging this. I know exactly what I'm going to be typing, but it still works great because as I'm typing, I can tell you what's going on. Now, when we have a header file, this is where we're going to declare our class as a template, right? Remember, classes are in a sense a template that when you instantiate, you make an object of that type of class. Okay. Now, if we were doing this back in like our main CPP, remember what we used to do when we had functions? We would list the name of the functions, the function footprint up at the top, also known as a function stub, and we would put it at the top, and it would just be basically the name of the function with the list of parameters with a semicolon behind it. That's similar to what the H file is. The H file is where we're going to declare all of our items and then later come back and fill in that information in the CPP file. So we're going to make a private variable. And because we are great developers, we are going to go ahead and initialize it on creation. So that way there is no chance that we accidentally get and use old memory spaces. We are going to have a constructor, even though we're not going to do anything with the constructor, excuse me. We're also going to have a private, a public integer called myAge, again, initializing. And then we're going to have a couple of methods. Make sure to follow up with those semicolons and spell the word void correctly. Right now, we're sitting there going, Professor Waits, I know I'm forgetting something. What am I forgetting in my header file? And this is so common. Make sure you put that semicolon at the end of my class or the class definition. We got to make sure we put that semicolon. It gets forgotten so often, and your compiler is going to complain about it, and it's not going to give you an error that really tells you what's going on. You'll have to, it's one of those things as a developer, you finally do it so much that when you get that odd error, you kind of know, oh yeah, there's a semicolon missing somewhere, and you can usually find it pretty fast. Now, I happen to know that this print my info is going to utilize something from the iStream header, the system header iStream. So we're going to go ahead and include that. There we go. All right, doing great. Let's move over to the class and let's do some definitions. Now, the first thing out of the gate when it comes to defining classes, and this is pretty standard, by the way, for a lot of organizations, and I'm greatly appreciative when people do it in class, is a little bit of a description, maybe a date um, in this code comment block, so that way everyone knows. The important piece to know about this code block is you have to start it with these two characters and you have to end it with these two characters. In between, you can make things look as pretty as you want as long as you don't put a star slash somewhere in this file. Like if we did a slash here, as you can see, all the colors change because it's confused. So make sure you don't do that. You can put stars and all kinds of characters. Just don't put the star slash until you're done. Now, because we need the header file as part of the class, let's go ahead and actually include that. And again, the difference here is because my class header file is not a system header, we have to put it in double quotes instead. And we want to include the .h. The system, the way we have it here, is going to look in the current directory for that header file. And because I don't want to type out std all the time, we're going to go ahead and say using the namespace std. We want to make sure we're doing plenty of code commenting so that way Professor Waits doesn't get angry at us. Oh, and one of the things to remember when you are specifying, now we're going to declare and kind of scope out what those methods are from our header file. So our first one was the actual constructor. So to do that, remember, we got to first type the class name and then the function name. And in this case, the function name is the same as the class header, or the class name. Like I said, we weren't going to do anything with it. So we're just opening and closing the brackets. At some point, maybe later in life, we might come back and add stuff to that, but we wanted to utilize a empty constructor. It works. And then remember, in fact, a lot of times I'll come over here and I will copy my header file out to here. And I can sometimes have a little bit of OCD when it comes to my coding. I like to be nice and neat. And this way, I have the start of all my classes. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to prefix all of these. Again, if you're going to do it this way, you do need to be a little bit meticulous about going back and filling in all the blanks. Like you want to say what this variable name is now, and you want to start and end the code block. Let's go ahead and do some basic stuff here. Obviously, they're sending in the age, so we should set the age. They are now sending in the ID. So we're going to set our variables in the class to those particular things. And then because the ID is a private instance, they are not going to be able to get a hold of that ID. So we had to create a method to allow them to get that ID if need be. And then something rather simple. There we go. So now we've declared all these methods and we have what we need in the file. You'll notice that I don't have the include in my CPP file because it's already in the header file. Now, one last thing that we're going to do to our header file just to make things nice and neat and save us some errors down the road, and that is you can accidentally get to where several of your classes include one particular header file. You can see places where the header file could be just loaded more than once, and you want to avoid that. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually say, hey, is there a definition for this my class? And it's all in caps because we are, in a sense, making a constant. And we're saying, if not defined my class H, then go ahead and let's define my class H. And then we'll also, by doing this, be including all of this stuff. And then we're going to end it with end if. So essentially what happens is if it hasn't been defined yet, then it's going to define it as well as load the code. And then if someone else tries to load it again, it'll say, oh, yeah, no, it's already defined, and just skip it. It won't do it again. This is a nice, neat, safe way and really should be part of all your header files. Now, with that being said, we're not going to utilize the class yet. We should be able to run it and have our old stuff still work and not get any errors. That worked, and that's great, but let's actually make use of the class now, right? So we have my class. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. Before we do that, we need to include that header file. That way our main knows about it. There we go. We are going to create a variable that has some meaning. Oh, and again, you don't really have IntelliSense in this nifty little program. That's okay. I know, you know what what my methods are. As you could see, it was there's enough intelligence to know that there is such a thing as new my class. What I'm doing is I'm demonstrating that um, our setting of actual variables and then utilizing them. So the first time I run the print my info, it should fall back on uh, the fact that we initialized those variables with zeros. And then I'm going to set that ID to 10 and then print out that information again. So now the age should still be 0, but the ID should be 10. Then we're going to set the age to 20 and then one last time do that print out. Okay, let's run this. Let's see it work. So there is that first call. And as I said, those are the zeros that we initialized. Then we say that the ID is 10. And as you can see, the 10 is there, but the age is still 0. Finally, we set the age to 20, and our new printout info makes use of all that information. That is how you can create and utilize your own classes with header files. So with that being said, this is a great review. Please feel free to rewind and kind of do this along with me so that way you get a nice feel of how to create your own classes. Thanks, and in the next video, we will fully jump into Chapter 10 and cover all of the things that we need to on strings.